the problematic content on Pornhub is not just the illegal content that's on the site, but this site was also infested with extreme racism. That's a huge problem, especially considering the fact that children are being educated on this content. And so that's another issue that needs to be addressed, and it should not be promoted, monetized, distributed, consumed, and especially consumed for pleasure. I think that probably takes it to another level, where people are actually getting pleasure off of this extreme racism, and that's not okay.
I do want to talk a little bit about going back to kind of the idea of if we want to create change, we have to affect their revenue. One thing you do so well in your book, Take Down, Inside the Fight to Shut Down Pornhub for Child Abuse, Rape, and Sex Trafficking. Part 1 of this episode we've already covered. You approached this so brilliantly and kind of working with a team of others. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of the role that Bowie has played in all of this, and then also what your interactions with credit card companies looked like kind of at this time, and what the objective was, what the goals were there?
Yeah. So, um, thanks to many advisors and people who were just colleagues and comrades and people who had been in the anti-trafficking fight for a long time. One of them who I especially appreciate in the book is Brad Miles, formerly with Polaris Project, now with Panorama. And the experience that he had in the Backpage fight, many of those in anti-trafficking were involved in the Backpage fight, and kind of looking back and trying to lessons learned, like what was what happened during that fight that was helpful and effective. And one of the things was the idea of the credit card companies, and how at that time Sheriff Tom Dart actually called out the credit card companies and said, look, you're monetizing child sex trafficking. And so that was kind of a template for this idea of, they play such an important role. If we're following the money, trying to end this corporate abuse, then one of the most effective things we could do is go after the mechanism for monetization. Interestingly, a judge in the federal, Serena's, she's a featured survivor in the book, and her case that she filed not only against MindGeek, its owners, but also against Visa for their role. And the judge said Visa gave Pornhub the very tool through which to enact the crime of benefiting from child trafficking. So they were critical, like the credit card companies were critical. And we understood this pretty early on. And there was a group of anti-trafficking organizations and advocates who were already on that trail and thought, yes, this is a good thing to pursue. So we came together to work on that. And it was confirmed, by the attorneys that were going to pursue that this was an important strategy as well for accountability purposes. So yeah, so that's kind of became the plan, is we have to go after the credit card companies to stop monetizing this illegal criminal content and bring it to their attention.
And you had some meetings with them. They didn't necessarily all respond right away. One thing that I think is particularly interesting is that you hadn't necessarily heard back from them, but you heard from a moderator that some changes to the processes for content moderation had been made within the company. And that was at the request of some of these credit card companies who reached out to them and said, hey, you have to make some changes, or we might have to make some changes, it sounds like. So, and one other thing I did want to note while we're talking about moderation is I thought it was so interesting that the moderator you spoke with mentioned that all of the moderators started just leaving your Twitter up at some point, because that was the quickest way, that became the quickest way to get problematic content removed, is you would tweet about it publicly and say, what's this doing on your platform? And then that's actually when it would be removed, because they were kind of keeping an eye on you. So everything you experienced in 2020, that all kind of built up to you reaching out to Nicholas Kristof from the New York Times. We've had him on this podcast before speaking about this article. Many people have seen the article, The Children of Pornhub, but tell us a little bit about that process, why was the article so important in the fight to hold Pornhub accountable? What were some of the outcomes of that article, including some of these things with credit card companies that we've just talked about?
Yes, that was such an important moment. And we would not be where we're at today in this fight. We have a ways to go still for sure, but the progress that has been made would not have been made without Nick Kristof and what he did through his investigation and that groundbreaking article, The Children of Pornhub. And, for context, before that, it's like, from February all the way to December. I mean, this is almost a year of fighting so hard, of battling the credit card companies again and again and trying to engage and provide more evidence and like push this thing forward. And there's been so many different articles that had already been written. I think by that time it was like 300 that had been written or more on this, and the petition had already 2 million signatures. But Pornhub had more videos on the site than it had at the beginning of 2020, and they were making more money than they had ever made in the history of their existence because of coronavirus, because people were locked at home and they were blasting all these PR stunts to the world of free Pornhub Premium and all of this stuff. And so they were actually doing better at the end of 2020 than they ever were before. And I remember just being in this moment of desperation before Nick Kristof's article came out, because I didn't know how it would be received. I mean, whether it would just kind of be printed and then everybody would be on with the next thing, or what would happen. And so I was blown away like everybody else when he released The Children of Pornhub, and it had so much impact. And thanks to the amazing work he did in speaking with so many victims and just putting together such a powerful article where he didn't mince words. Like, he was just straight to the point. Like, he ended that article saying that, Pornhub is Jeffrey Epstein times 1,000. And it just broke things open in a way that like hadn't happened. So that was a pivotal moment in this fight, was when that happened.
And what are some of the things that started to kind of immediately, very quickly, because of that article, take place?
Well, suddenly, there was this enormous, like bigger than ever spotlight on what was happening. And journalists were doing follow-on stories. First it's like hundreds and then thousands, and everything that happened created a new news cycle. So, we'd have Justin Trudeau, who responded in Canada within, 24 hours of the article being released. And then we had members of Parliament in Canada calling for an investigation. And we had, most importantly, the credit card companies were being swarmed by journalists asking the question that Nick asked in his article: why are they still doing business with Pornhub? And so they were being pressured now, like from the outside, right? Because before, this is just like more private conversations that are happening, not it's they're not budging. Now suddenly they have journalists from the outside asking this question, a huge spotlight being put on the company, and then people being activated by this article. For example, Bill Ackman, who got activated by reading that article to help. And so then they said, they made an announcement that they were going to investigate Pornhub for what was written in the article. Pornhub's in a frenzy. They're, most concerned about losing the credit cards, probably more than anything. This is their worst fear, their worst nightmare, that this could happen. And that's when they deleted 80% of the site in 24 hours, where 10 million videos and over 30 million images were suddenly gone from Pornhub. And then more happened after that, but that was kind of like the immediate impact of that article.
Yes. And for anyone who doesn't know, the reason that content was removed was because they couldn't verify the users, which was the very process you went through, the very thing you sounded the alarm on. And to know that 80% of the content on their site they couldn't verify wasn't problematic, and to have removed it all so quickly, knowing that content is everything to them, is so, so, so telling.
Yes. 100%.
So after that, beginning in early 2021, the Canadian House of Commons Ethics Committee launched their investigation into MindGeek for reportedly hosting videos of child sexual abuse, rape, sex trafficking, non-consensually distributed content. And that starts with the hearing the testimony from Serena, who was featured in Christoph's article. And you spent a lot of time talking with Mike Bowie, who you worked with on an investigation into Pornhub and MindGeek. Spent a lot of time with. What did it mean for you for them to finally be able to share their testimony?
Yeah, no, that was a very important moment. One thing that we didn't mention that also happened though right after Nick Kristoff's article was Visa, MasterCard, and Discover said they were cutting ties with Pornhub. And so that made like
Yes.
waves around the world that, they made this decision to cut off Pornhub. And we realized it was kind of a half measure later, but at the time, we thought they just removed 80% of the entire website and they were just completely demonetized by the credit card companies. And so that was
Yep.
what we felt happened at that moment. But then, yes, the Canadian parliamentary hearings started at the beginning of 2021. And that was such a important moment to get the truth about Pornhub onto the public record, the public parliamentary record, and give numerous victims the opportunity to share their stories. And actually to get the executives of MindGeek on the public record for the first time, because they had avoided, being public. They had hidden themselves from the public. They had hidden, used fake photos online. And in some cases, the VP of Pornhub was using fake names to speak out in the media and fake personas and all of this. And then suddenly they're subpoenaed to testify in front of Canadian Parliament to the world, recorded, right? And they have to now be questioned for what has happened. And that was a very important moment. And they did not do very well.
One thing you do so well is detail who these executives actually are, what their roles look like, and how they hid behind some pretty significant PR efforts, hiring pretty large PR firms to try to um, make things look any better for them than they could. So to have them have to engage in these parliamentary hearings, engage in explaining what's going on, and to your point, no, they did not do very well. Um, tell us some kind of highlights from those hearings that you think are noteworthy for anyone who maybe didn't see them.
I mean, one of them was, Corey Ehrman, who was the VP of Pornhub, who had been hiding his persona using fake names Blake White and Corey Price and whatnot for years, actually having to put his face out there and be named and admit that he was using these fake personas for so long. That was a highlight, but also, being able to see the way that the members of parliament were not letting them off the hook. Like they were actually grilling them for what they have done to victims and calling them out for crime. They do not, you know, shy away in that hearing for saying, you have committed crime. You have not reported child sexual abuse. Do you know that it is illegal in Canada? There is prison time for not reporting known instances of child sexual abuse material. And at the same time, showing that they hadn't done that. Like they actually were able to call them out on unlawful behavior there in front of the world. I thought that was really critical. And also just to give survivors the platform to tell their stories and put that on the record. I thought that was a very meaningful and important moment.
Can you actually tell our listeners how many cases were actually reported of child sexual abuse material on Pornhub?
According to the testimony of the leading child protection agencies in Canada and the United States, they had made 0 reports since their genesis. So this is now, we're at 13 years after they were founded. And these agency heads, these are the places where this content would be reported. If it's reported here. And the heads of those agencies is on the record, on the parliamentary record, under oath, testifying. They had made zero reports. What that means is that they were hiding child sexual abuse material from authorities that they knew about. And we even have confirmation of that from, there's one chapter in the book where I'm going down this rabbit hole of Reddit comments by a senior community manager, a senior manager at MindGeek. And in one of them, somebody on Reddit is saying, help, like I just found child sexual abuse, child pornography all over Pornhub. What do I do? And her response is, you don't need to report it to the authorities. Just send it to us and we'll take care of it. That was her response to him. Now we know that they weren't reporting it. They were not reporting it to authorities. And this was also confirmed in depositions that were taken in legal discovery and child sex trafficking cases, confirmed by MindGeek employees themselves. So this is a fact. Like, this is an on the record fact that they were not reporting. And what does that say? And to me, it's horrific that they weren't doing that. But when you kind of go deeper and you think about, this really breaks my heart so much, is that imagine how many kids could have been saved from those situations of abuse if all those years they had been reporting like they should have been reporting. That was required by law for them to be reporting. How many kids would not have to had spent their life in situations of abuse if they had been doing that? And that is just so unforgivable. Like, it's not okay that that happened.
Yep. And to run a porn site and not have the most basic policy parameters for something that legally you are required to do is report, to not have that in place while running many porn sites actually does fairly clearly indicate that they didn't care, that it was a conscious choice not to do it, which is alarming. During one of those hearings from the ethics committee, along with several of the victims who had videos non-consensually hosted on Pornhub, as well as other experts, you were actually able to share some survivor testimonies that had been sent to you, as well as titles of videos on Pornhub and suggested search terms on Pornhub. What impact did your testimony in these hearings have on the committee's understanding of the issue?
They were just lying left and right about things that were clearly, based on identifiable and demonstrated and recorded facts, not true. And they were just freely saying these things. I really felt like I want to have a chance to set the record straight on that and be able to refute some of those lies that they were telling. And so for me, that was why it was important to be able to go on the record and say those things. And I definitely felt a moment of relief when after I kind of did I think you have 7 minutes to kind of lay out your first statement, and then you get questions after that, when one of the members said, well, you have demonstrated that what they said were lies. In other words, that's not the exact quote of what she said, but she basically said, like, what you have said has refuted what they said and proved them to be lies. And to me, that was just, I felt so much relief in that moment. It was very important to me.
These hearings were streamed, so our team, this being an issue we're obviously focused on, watched these in real time, and to see from our perspective, even the shift in their understanding of these issues based on your testimony and the testimony of other survivors, it was so apparent and it was so needed. I mean, we also watched mighty executives tell lies while we were so frustrated to see this happening, because um, they were so easily to prove as lies. And so it was so helpful, I think, that you were able to share what you did.
It was, but I would also just say, no matter, what I was able to share, I just feel like the most important thing that was shared was the opportunity that they gave survivors to go on the public record, because I feel like they were very impacted by the testimony of Serena and all the others, Vicky that went and testified, and others that had the chance to anonymously share their stories. And I could just see they kept referencing over and over the way that they had heard directly. They say, well, you're saying that, right? But we've heard directly from survivors that and very credible testimony that what you're
Yeah.
saying is not true. And so I think that was such a powerful moment as well.
I agree. And the amount of courage it took those survivors as well to be so willing to share their experiences in the way that they did. It did make a huge difference, and it does matter so much. And I think created a lot of safety for others to come forward anonymously or otherwise to be able to share their stories and seek justice as well. Can you talk a little bit about the lawsuit that Mike Bowie filed in June of 2021, and maybe also who Mike Bowie is for anyone who's unfamiliar. But the lawsuit he filed on behalf of those survivors of trafficking and abuse.
Yeah. So, an important lawsuit that I highlight in this story, and just as a disclaimer, like there are other very important lawsuits that have been filed, to date right now as it stands. I'm, trying to keep track. It's hard because there's a lot being filed, but since 2020, 26 lawsuits have been filed on behalf of nearly 300 survivors, and those include multiple class actions on behalf of tens of thousands of child victims. And all of those attorneys are doing an amazing job for the clients that they represent. And so, I was able to kind of highlight one particular litigation in this story, but all of them are so important and so needed. And this particular litigation that's highlighted in my book, the lead attorney on that is a attorney from New York whose name is Mike Bowie, and he has a history of very high stakes, very large corporate litigation on behalf of kind of powerful corporate actors. And he had actually litigated the biggest hedge fund insider trading case in history against Stevie Cohen and SAC Capital. That was a very important case. And so that was kind of his background. And he was activated into this issue by reading, he'd heard about sex trafficking and he had a desire to be able to use his skills and his background to affect this in some way. And so it was incredible when he was able to start engaging with these survivors and helping to represent them in their pursuit of justice. There was a case that was filed on behalf of 34 victims, represented by Brown Rutnick, Mike Bowie, and his partner. And they, importantly, they sued not only MindGeek and Pornhub, but also the individual owners by name. They also sued Visa, which was a really important part of accountability. So that was the litigation that was filed. Serena was the kind of the lead named plaintiff in that filing, but they're still filing cases. Just last month, there was 13 cases filed by survivors represented by Mike Bowie, who are now not only suing Pornhub, MindGeek, the individual owners, and Visa, but through a long process of discovery over the last couple of years, they've figured out that there's enough information to be able to rope in the hedge funds who funded MindGeek. So they've actually roped in Redwood Capital and Colbeck Capital for their participation in funding this sex trafficking venture. And so that is now part of this ongoing litigation.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about the work you've done with Justice Defense Fund in our last episode, but for anyone who maybe missed that or maybe is a survivor or someone looking to get this kind of support or possibly pursue litigation, can you tell them where they can reach out for resources?
Yeah, sure. You can go to justicedefensefund.org and we have a find help tab there and form, and you can fill out your information there, and then you will be contacted by a trauma-informed licensed advocate who then can speak with you and kind of help you along in that process.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Can you talk a little bit about the shift that happened in 2021 and how Pornhub was making revenue?
Yes. So they had always been monetizing their content with ads from the very beginning, selling millions of ads per day, billions actually, 4.6 billion. But they were focused also on being able to monetize their content with those premium subscriptions and also the pay to download content. Now, the credit card companies cut them off. Apparently, we didn't know, but they went back 2 weeks later to Pornhub's advertising arm called Traffic Junkie. And Traffic Junkie is how they use advertisements to place ads on all of the content on the site. And so they began to, because they said, well, this is how we can monetize right now, because we may not have the credit cards for premium and we may not have it for pay to download, but we have them for advertising. So they began to really focus their attention on how to beef up their advertising arm to make up for lost revenue. And that's the shift that was made in 2021, where they began to focus more there and were making most of the revenue from advertising at that time.
Can you tell us a little bit about the New Yorker article in the following year called The Fight to Hold Pornhub Accountable and kind of what happened surrounding the release of that article?
Yeah, so after we had understood, thanks to a MindGeek employee who came forward to say, hey, you thought that the credit card companies cut off Pornhub, but they didn't. And so we became aware that that was an ongoing issue. At the same time, the New Yorker was developing an investigation and was planning to release a really important article that they had named The Fight to Hold Pornhub Accountable, which was kind of a summary of what had happened so far, but also unveiling new information with new sources from MindGeek and highlighting another survivor story. And so that article came out and that put another big spotlight on Pornhub. And important at the end of the article, the journalist mentioned the fact that the credit card companies actually had gone back to Pornhub. And I was so pleased that she was able to highlight that important point. But shortly after that, the CEO and the COO were forced to resign, and the details of why that happened, kind of the inside baseball behind the scenes of how that all happened, is detailed in the book. But that happened, and so their resignation came after that, and many of their hundreds of employees were fired at that time as well from that article.
At that point, you also published a piece in Newsweek titled "Why Are Visa and Mastercard Still Doing Business with Pornhub?" Tell us a little bit about that experience for you.
Yeah. So again, it was like kind of deja vu a little bit from the beginning of this fight. And, we had come so far and we felt like we had made this amazing progress only to be let down by the news that the credit card companies had gone back and just like, what can we do? How can we address this now? And I felt it was important to do another op-ed to shine a light on what was happening with the credit card companies. And so I was able to do that. It wasn't easy to do. It was challenging to even get that published, but thankfully it ended up being able to be published. And it was a call out to say, why are Visa and MasterCard still doing business with Pornhub? And so that kind of just helped shine a light. I was able to like send that to Bill Ackman, send that to the credit card companies themselves, being like, hey, we're not going to ignore this. We're not going to let you just go and continue this. Like, we're going to actually continue to call you out on this.
And important to note, because they take a percentage of payments processed, they were also knowingly profiting from these problematic things, which you also detail in the book. And I think that's important for people to note. It wasn't just important for credit card companies to stop supporting Pornhub to help Pornhub stop the problematic things they were doing. The credit card companies were also needing to be held accountable for profiting from these same things.
Yes, very important to all of this is to understand the role that the credit card companies do play in monetizing and benefiting from this illegal content. And they are able to even charge higher transaction rates on what is very justifiably considered high risk with a company like MindGeek, high risk transactions that they are charging higher rates for. So they're making even more money on those transactions than on other kinds of content. And they were benefiting. And that's the basis for litigation as well, is it's unlawful to knowingly benefit from a trafficking venture. in the United States. And so they needed to be held accountable and do need to be held accountable for actually profiting from the distribution of that illegal content and doing it knowingly, right? Like with knowledge, like you are aware and are continuing to do that.
Absolutely. And some of what's so great about this book is it really details the behind the scenes work that you did in those private meetings, in full giving full presentations to these credit card companies about exactly what was happening and exactly what they were knowingly supporting. So they couldn't claim they didn't have knowledge because they were very well informed. And so all of these steps forward are so important and so needed, but there's still so much to do. Tell us a little bit about kind of what's next for you, especially now that this book has been released, and what listeners can do, how everyone can kind of support this work and this continued fight.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm a broken record. I've been talking about the same thing since 2020, and it's kind of all I talk about is holding Pornhub accountable, but we're not done yet. This is about stopping real sexual crime, real child abuse, rape, sex trafficking, image-based sexual abuse from being immortalized online, from being globally distributed and monetized, and shattering the lives of countless victims around the world. And this company has to be held fully accountable to the full extent of the law for what's happened. Because if they're allowed to kind of like just say, sorry, we won't do it anymore and go on their merry way, that's not what justice looks like. Victims deserve justice. They need it for healing, for closure, right? When somebody does something so egregious, there needs to be serious consequences, not only for victims to obtain the justice that they deserve, but because it's an important deterrent for future abusers. Because other companies can't look at the situation and say, that's just the cost of doing business. We can handle that. No, there has to be criminal prosecution. We need to see restitution for victims. We really need to see Pornhub shut down. I mean, you can go to backpage.com and it was seized by the DOJ because they had engaged in allowing their site and to be used for selling children for child sex trafficking. We need to see the same thing for Pornhub. And then what we need to see, and this is so important, is we need those policies put in place that are demand reliable third-party agent consent verification for every single person and every single video on every single website that distributes user-generated porn. And when we do that, we will make a huge dent in preventing this from happening again on other websites that may want to copy Pornhub or its biggest competitors that would operate in the same way. And so I think all of those things together are so important. And those are the next kind of targets in this fight. And we got to just keep going and not let up until we see justice fully served. So I hope that this book, for me, my hope in this book is there's so many people out there. We think everybody's heard about this, in my bubble, right? In my Twitter bubble, our work, we think, oh, everybody's heard about this. It's amazing to me for people to say, this is the first time I've heard about this. I had no idea that this even happened. And so I hope that this reaches many more people, that they can get the full truth, that they can use me as an avatar. That's what I had this idea of, I want you to use me as an avatar to experience what I experienced so you can get the truth not only in your head, but you can get the truth in your heart, that you can feel what it's been like to meet the victims, to talk to the whistleblowers, to understand the depth of horrific crime that has been, enabled by this website to be distributed across the world and all of that. So at the end of it, you're as passionate about this as I am and as the survivors are who've endured this, and that we can come together stronger than we've ever been to put even more pressure on our government to produce criminal prosecution, on lawmakers to actually do something to stop this, and for them to be held fully accountable. So that's the hope for takedown.
That's so well said. And you said something in our last episode talking about this of just the true impact that one person can make. And I think one amazing thing about this book is we do see the impact you've made, but we also hear a very firsthand, as you've said, about the impact that survivors and those who've just liked a post on Twitter, and the true impact and of the magnitude of that, of someone who took 30 seconds, read about a petition, and chose to sign it. There is a ripple effect for every single action that's taken in this movement. And if ever you feel like you're the only one who cares about this issue, or you're the only one who, has a problem with porn or Pornhub, please read this book, because I think this is such a concise way to understand the magnitude of the problem with this platform, to understand that this is not just a moral argument, as you said. This has to do with the fact that real people are being hurt on this platform, have been hurt on this platform, and very little accountability has occurred, and we can't continue to let that happen. And as you said, we often think people know about this, but I just had a conversation with someone yesterday who I was telling about this book that I was reading in preparation for this interview, and they said, I had no idea. I just assumed, this was regulated because it's kind of a mainstream thing. I assumed it was regulated. I think so many people don't know. So I would just encourage any of our listeners who've taken the time to listen to this interview, please consider reading this book. Laila, can you tell us where to find this book for anyone interested?
Books are being sold online, like major retailers. Also, you could go to takedownbook.com, where we have a website where you can, read more about it and whatnot. I want to make sure you know that 100% of author royalty proceeds are being donated to the Justice Defense Fund to help further the cause of justice. So that's really important to me as well. And yeah, I am just so grateful. I'm thankful that you are ending on the note of the power of the movement, the power, some people, and I write about this also in the book, that at some points people tried to say, like, frame this as like the one woman's battle against Pornhub. And it's like, no, that's not what this is about. Like, this is, if it was just a one woman angry on Twitter, I'm telling you, none of this would have ever happened. It's only because all of the organizations that came together, the activists, the citizen activists, the social media activists, the lawyers and the journalists and the whistleblowers, and most important of all, the survivors who came forward, that's what made all this possible. And I love it because we all came together from so many different backgrounds. And that, I feel, is such a kind of beautiful testament to the power of agreement and unity on something that's so easy to unify on. It's like, nobody should be raped and trafficked for profit on the world's largest porn site. So we can have pro-porn people and anti-porn people and atheists and Christians and everybody in between, right and left, coming together. And I think I want to continue to see that happen. And we need more of that in all of this. And yeah, so I hope people are inspired and encouraged, and will get activated to just continue the amazing work that they're already doing following your organization, and will continue. So thanks.
Thank you. That's so well said. And also, it is worth noting your leadership in this fight is pivotal, and we are all so grateful. And I do hope people will take the time to read your book and really be able to experience this as you've experienced this, because you can't not care deeply about it once you have. So I think thank you for taking the time to write this out, to document everything along the way, knowing that documentation would be important at some point, and to be able to have all of this evidence to share is so compelling and so important, just for all of us to really understand and to know that this isn't something any of us would ever be okay with in society, yet it's so normalized. So to know we can do something to combat it is so important. Laila, thank you so much. What an honor it is to get to talk to you. I could talk to you all day. I have so many questions, and I'm so grateful for so many things that you've done and for your leadership in this movement. And we're excited to continue to support and follow the work that you do. Is there anything else you want to cover?
No, but thank you. It was so good to spend time with you, and I appreciate you so much. And yeah, thanks for this opportunity to share with your following about all this. And Yeah, just appreciate it so much.
Thank you. And to any of our listeners, please check out Lila's book. There's a link in the show notes. Again, it is called Takedown. It is addressing the fight to shut down Pornhub for child abuse, rape, and sex trafficking. Please have conversations about this with your friends. Follow content about this on social media. Use your voice to engage in this movement. And together, we really can powerfully hold these abusers accountable.
A 2021 nationally representative survey of U.S. teens shows 84.4% of males and 57% of females ages 14 through 18 have viewed porn. As porn becomes increasingly normalized in the digital age, education on its well-documented harms becomes increasingly important. Fight the New Drug's age-appropriate and engaging live presentations highlight research from respected academic institutions that demonstrate the significant impacts of porn consumption on individuals, relationships, and society. Request a Fight the New Drug live presentation for your school, business, or community event by visiting ftnd.org/live. That's ftnd.org/LIVE. Hey parents, navigating the digital world with your kids can be tough, but it doesn't have to be. Introducing the Raise app, your free guide to confident parenting in the digital age. Raise helps you manage screen time, tackle cyberbullying, and protect your kids from online predators. With expert advice, engaging family challenges, a handy goal tracking feature, and more, Raise is here to help support you every step of the way. Download the Raise app today at ftnd.org/raise and start building a safer digital future for your family. That's ftnd.org/raise.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Consider Before Consuming. Consider Before Consuming is brought to you by Fight the New Drug. Fight the New Drug is a non-religious and a non-legislative organization that exists to provide individuals the opportunity to make an informed decision regarding pornography by raising awareness on its harmful effects, using only science, facts, and personal accounts. Check out the episode notes for resources mentioned in this episode. If you find this podcast helpful, consider subscribing and leaving a review. Consider Before Consuming is made possible by listeners like you. If you'd like to support Consider Before Consuming, you can make a one-time or recurring donation of any amount at ftnd.org/support. That's ftnd.org/support. Thanks again for listening. We invite you to increase your self-awareness, look both ways, check your blind spots, and consider before consuming.